One of the findings you'll come across in Database Health Monitor may be DBCC CheckDB not being run or not being run recently. Now, what does this do? DBCC CheckDB scans your entire SQL Server database, or many of them if you're running it on all of them, to determine if there's any corruption that's happened in your data file, or if it determines the integrity of your data file to make sure it's good. Now, occasionally something may happen that causes your database to become corrupt, and the point of CheckDB is it's there to be run to find that and catch it so that you can deal with it before it becomes a much worse situation. So the question is, how frequently should you run CheckDB? And my general recommendation for CheckDB is twice daily if you can, or at a minimum once daily. Now, some people may say, well, I don't have enough CPU or enough I/O available on my SQL Server to run CheckDB any more often than once a week. Well, that's not a good thing. And the question I would ask is, what's more important, rebuilding your indexes or backing up your databases, or knowing if your database is corrupt or not? Now, they kind of all go hand in hand, and you got to figure out how to balance it. But if you can't run CheckDB regularly, you could end up in a situation where you have a corrupt database and you're going to lose the data. And it's possibly a situation you could have recovered from had you had more frequent CheckDB being run. Let's take an example of CheckDB being run weekly on Saturday nights. Well, if corruption is introduced Monday sometime during the day, you've got your whole week's worth of data that could be lost or destroyed because it becomes corrupt and you don't know about it if CheckDB is not being run until Saturday night. So my preference is run CheckDB twice a day if you can, run it once a day at a minimum, but anything less than that is just too dangerous. You get too much exposure to ending up with a corrupt database. And the thing is, database corruption, there's no way to completely prevent it. There's a lot of things you can do to help reduce it with great hardware and redundancies and all kinds of things like that. But there is always a chance, even with the absolute best hardware, that you will end up with a corrupt database one day. And with CheckDB being run frequently is the only way to really know that your database is corrupt or is not corrupt. Another finding that may show up as part of Database Health Monitor and our regular checking there is the max server memory setting not being set. Now what this does is it says SQL Server is only allowed to take up so much memory. Now, usually I like to set that somewhere around 90 to 95% depending on how much other things are running on your SQL Server. Let's say your server is running SQL Server and a mail server and it's a file server and it's running IIS and a bunch of stuff like that. Well, you may want to give SQL Server a much smaller percentage or amount of memory that it can use. If you're running SQL Server and it's a dedicated SQL Server, maybe we give it 95%. But it's really something you have to set and monitor over time and see what happens. An example of a scenario that went bad is my desktop computer that I work on every day. I have 2 SQL Server instances running on it. I never set max server memory on it because it's a test server. I didn't really care about it, and I've got 64 gigs of RAM. Well, the other night, some test job went a little bit wild and chewed up all that memory. And the next morning, I sat down on my computer, started working, had a sip of coffee, and realized that Outlook had crashed on me, and then Chrome was crashing on me, and every application I tried to run, Word, Excel, everything was crashing on me. And finally I noticed one of the messages, it crashed because it said it was out of memory. I thought, gee, 64 gigs on my desktop here, how could it be out of memory? I looked, and one of my SQL Server processes had used up all of the available memory because I had not set that max server memory setting. So if you have multiple instances running on your SQL Server, you want to make sure that the total of all of the memory allocated for those instances does not exceed the limit that you're going for. Whether it's 90%, maybe you give half of that 90% to one instance and half to the other, or maybe you split it up differently. One test server I have has 17 SQL Server instances running on it. In that case, well, we can only give each SQL Server instance about 5% of the memory because there's so many instances running on that server. Now, that's a test server, not recommended ever doing that for a production environment, but it kind of shows the point. Use the SQL Server max server memory setting and get it set on your SQL Server so that you don't run out of memory and have more serious issues. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like it, please click the thumbs up icon. And if you want to subscribe, click subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we have new videos. All right, have a great day.